Hello there, Lawrence Grayson back again for shortformvideo.com with another After Effects tutorial for you to have a go at. And as always, the project file for this tutorial will also be available for download from my website at shortformvideo.com. As you can see from the preview, what we're creating today is a Woodgrain effect along with a procedural shatter effect that reveals your logo. So if you download the project file, you'll be able to just drop your logo into the placeholder Precomp and run with it from there. But if you'd like to know how to create this yourself, then that's what we'll do here. So the first thing we're going to do is create our Woodgrain texture. So I'll create a new comp and call it Woodgrain Effect. It's going to be 10 seconds long, and I'm using my ever favorite 720p preset, and just hit OK. In that composition, we're going to create a new solid. I'll call this base background and just hit OK. Then go to your effects and presets panel and find the fractal noise effect and just drop that onto your base background. In the effect controls, we want to go to the transform twirl down, uncheck uniform scaling, set the width to about 2000, and then the height to 2, or maybe even 3, just to widen it up a bit. And as you can see, it gives you that random vertical streaking, which is obviously great for the base wood grain. Next thing we're going to do is go back to the effects and presets panel and find the turbulent displace effect. Again, drag that onto your base background, and you get this. It's kind of a wave style warp, but it's a little bit strong, so I'm just going to turn down the amount to about 20. And if you look closely, you'll also note that some of the lines are a little bit jagged, so to remove that, you set the anti-aliasing from low to high. Okay, so you could just run with that if you're looking for a fairly simple wood grain effect. But I like it to be a little bit more sophisticated than that, so go back to your effects and presets panel and find the liquefy effect, and again drop that on top. Now this will just let us bend and distort various areas based upon a brush. It's very much like the liquefy tool you'll find in Photoshop. Now the tool we want to use primarily is the bloat tool, which is this fella here. And we're just going to create some areas to hold the knots in the wood. So with the bloat tool selected, just pick some random areas and hold down the bloat tool, and you'll see it separates the grain and pushes it around the brush. Another thing you can do is take the warp tool and just add a little bit of variation in the wood grain, just to make it look a little bit more convincing. And finally, we're going to create a new shape layer. Select the ellipse tool, pick the eyedropper, and just select the darkest tone from your existing wood grain effect as the fill color, and turn stroke off. And all we're going to do now is just draw an ellipse over the knot placeholders that we've had. Now you can always go back and adjust these later, which I'll do. So that one's just a little off center. Might just tweak that one just a touch. Now you can also give them a little bit of rotation. To make it look a little bit more natural. And the final touch here is to find the fast blur effect, drop that onto your shape layer, and we'll just blur it by about 4. And that'll just soften the edges and make them look a little bit more like they belong. Okay, so that's all looking pretty good. Now I'm just going to pre-comp those 2 layers by selecting them both and hitting Ctrl, Shift and C. We'll call this Woodgrain Texture Precomp and just hit OK. And to color that, we'll go to the Effects and Presets panel and find the Tritone effect, and we'll just drop that on top and play around with the colors a little bit until it looks how we want it to look. Now what I'd like to do here is just take the highlights eyedropper and pick up the mid-tone value, and then click on the mid-tone value, make that a little bit darker, and then maybe the highlights a little bit grayer. But obviously the colors you pick will be entirely up to you, based upon the kind of wood you want it to look like. Okay, so that's pretty good. That'll do for now. Next stage is to create our logo. So create a new composition, again 720p. I'll call this logo placeholder. Now I'm just going to grab my short form video logo, which is already transparent, and I'll just demonstrate that by dropping the Woodgrain Precomp underneath it. So we've got a transparent logo. Now obviously you can use any shape or text or layer that you want, but it has to have an alpha transparency value in it. If you just bring in an ordinary JPEG or a photo or a bitmap, it won't work at all. So you need these areas of transparency for this effect to work. Okay, so I'll get rid of the Woodgrain effect. Okay, so our next stage is to create a wooden version of this logo. So create a brand new composition, call it Wooden Logo, hit OK, bring the Woodgrain effect and your logo placeholder pre-comp into it with the logo placeholder on top. Now if you don't already have the track matte view up, typically speaking you'll have this view by default. If you hit F4, it'll bring up the track matte settings. On the Woodgrain effect, select Alpha Matte Logo Placeholder, and that will just use the alpha value of the above precomp to cut out the Woodgrain effect from beneath. So that's already looking pretty cool. Now we're going to do the opposite thing to create a shatter map. So create another new composition, call it Shatter Map, hit OK. Bring in the Woodgrain effect and the logo placeholder, and on the Woodgrain effect select Alpha Inverted Matte Logo Placeholder, and that'll just do the reverse. It'll use the transparency to cut out of the Woodgrain effect placeholder to, underneath. So we're getting close to our final version. We're going to create a new composition and call it Final Comp, and just hit OK. Bring in your Woodgrain effect, your wooden logo, and your shatter map. Now it's important they are arranged with the shatter map at the top, the wooden logo underneath, and the Woodgrain effect. Now because they're all taken from the same map, you shouldn't see any difference at all. Go to the Effects and Presets panel and select your curves and apply that to the Woodgrain effect. And we're just going to make it pale by dragging the top end of the curves and just dragging it in. So as you can see, we've got a paler version, because obviously when you chisel the top of the wood away, the outside tends to be darker and oxidized, and the natural wood underneath it is a lot paler. Now that we've done that, I want you to select the Woodgrain effect with the curves layer applied, hit Ctrl Shift and C to pre-comp it. We'll call it Woodgrain Background Pale. Make sure all the attributes are moved into the new composition and just hit OK. If we just solo that now, you'll see we've got a much paler version for the background. Now I'm going to solo the wooden logo version. Right click, select Layer Styles and Bevel Emboss. And if we just add the Woodgrain background, you'll see what we're aiming for. It doesn't look right at the moment, that's not what we're after. So in the Bevel and Emboss settings, select Outer Bevel, and that's much closer to how we want it to look. But there's a couple of changes you need to make here, and we can leave the size at 5, that's pretty good. But change the technique to Chisel Soft, and change the highlight mode from Screen to Overlay, and that'll just blend it in a little bit more and make it look a little bit more realistic, because let's face it, natural wood doesn't reflect a whole lot of light. Okay, so really if you were just looking for a static logo with a wood effect, that's how to create it. But we want ours to move, and that's what motion graphics is all about after all. So I'll just take the solo values off. And the one thing you'll notice immediately is we've actually got a little bit of visibility on the shatter map, because the edges of the bevel and emboss are slightly feathered, and After Effects uses subpixel rendering, so you actually get these faint highlights of the underlying logo, which we don't want. So just to tidy that up, I'm going to go to the Effects and Presets panel and find the Simple Choker effect, drag that onto the shatter map, and then just choke the map by about -1, possibly -1.5, and you'll see that those telltale signs will actually take down to -2. Those telltale signs of the logo underneath have now disappeared. Okay, so we've got our top shatter map, we've got our wooden embossed logo, and we've got our pale background. Now if you recall from the preview, we've actually got 3 segments here. So to make it look a little bit like planks, I'm going to turn the visibility off for the shatter map, but keep that layer selected. We tap apostrophe on the keyboard to bring up our title safe guidelines. With the shatter map layer still selected, hit Ctrl Shift and N for Nigel to create a new mask, and then Ctrl and T to bring up the transform handles. And we'll just drag the top and the bottom of the mask in towards the center, just to isolate the logo in the middle. Now if I bring the turn the visibility back on for the shatter map, you can see we've now got a dark strip along the middle. Hit Ctrl and D to duplicate the shatter map, and we'll rename it to Outside Planks. Tap M to bring up the mask properties and change it from add to subtract, and that'll just invert the mask that we've just duplicated to restore the outside layers. I'm going to turn the visibility off the shatter map so we can see what we're doing next. In order to match the outside planks up to the same depth and emboss of the logo, go to your wooden logo, find the bevel and emboss settings you've already created, hit Ctrl C to copy them, and then just paste that value onto the outside planks, and it'll just add the same bevel and emboss effect. I'm just going to drag the outside planks so that they're underneath the shatter map. Okay, so now it's time to start chewing some things up. Let's go to the Effects and Presets panel and find the Shatter Effect. Drag that onto your shatter map. Change the view to rendered. Drill down the shape properties and select the glass pattern. Turn the repetitions up to 100. And I'll just scrub through this and you'll see that gives us our default exploding shatter. That's not actually what we're after. So twirl down the force value. Set the depth at 0.1. and the strength to 3. And with the timeline indicator at the beginning of the timeline, create a keyframe for position. Holding down Shift, drag the X value to take the keyframe for the position right off to the left-hand side of the frame. You can see the indicator for it there. Move the timeline indicator to the 5-second mark. And we're just going to drag that X value back across the screen until it's to the right hand side of the frame. Let me just create a quick RAM preview of that. Okay, that's looking pretty cool. Need to do a couple of things to really sell the effect a little bit. As you can see, all the shatter elements are pretty dark because they're taking their color values from the top texture layer. And realistically, you want them to look bright as if they're fresh wood and a mixture of fresh wood and dark wood. So in the Shatter Effects, twirl down Textures, and then the side mode, which should be set to layer by default, select Woodgrain BG Pale. And that will give you a mix of dark and pale chunks. Now they are looking a little bit on the chunky side, so I might just go back to the shape and take the extrusion depth down to 0.1 just to thin them down a bit, make them look a little bit more realistic. Now you'll notice by doing by changing the side texture value, it's actually taking the entire base layer. So what we're going to do there to correct that is just to duplicate the Woodgrain Pale, and we'll rename it to Map. Take the mask from the shatter map, hit Ctrl+C to copy it, and then just paste it onto our Woodgrain Background Pale map with Ctrl and V. Hit Ctrl, Shift and C to Precomp it. And then back in our shatter map, go to Textures and select Woodgrain Background Pale Map Precomp. And that'll just cut off those extra particles that it was creating. Okay, and we're almost there, but obviously no project is complete without a little bit of vignetting, so let's create a new black solid. We'll call it Vignette. Double click on the ellipse tool, set the mask to subtract, hit F to bring up the feather values, increase the feather, maybe expand the mask, and drop the opacity a touch. And let's just see how that looks. So we can pretty much leave it there, but there's a little trick I'd like to show you before we finish. If we go back to the Woodcut preview that I had, you'll see that I've created the slightly more ornate version of the logo placeholder. And I did that in the logo placeholder itself. Let me bring in the brush that I created. So here's a Photoshop file I created with a custom brush to give us that ornate look. I'll just scale that up. Now if you just drop that into the logo placeholder, it won't quite work. So if I go back, you'll see A, it obscures the logo you've got, and B, it causes all sorts of trouble on the outside planks, which we don't want. So to correct that, go to your shatter map and find that mask again. Hit Ctrl and C to copy the mask. Go back to your logo placeholder and hit Control and V just to trim the background down. Hit M to bring up the mask properties. In fact, hit M twice quickly to bring up the mask properties. And we're just going to kill the expansion by taking it down to -10, and that'll bring it in on either side. So if we go back, you'll see it's tidied up the edges. But we can probably shrink it down a little bit more, take it down to -20. But we've still got issues with the visibility of the logo. So to fix that, I'm going to duplicate the logo, and then with the PSD file for the floral texture I've got, I'm going to select the track matte to alpha inverted matte. I'll just turn the visibility of the top logo layer off so you can see what I'm doing. With the bottom logo layer selected, select layer styles and stroke. Now if I zoom in, you'll see by increasing the stroke size value, you actually increase the size of the transparency cutout of the track matte. So now when I turn the visibility switch on for the top logo layer, we see we've got this nice logo in the middle and a cutout around it that matches perfectly. So when I go back to the final comp, you'll see that everything looks as though it's been engraved out. So once again, I'll just round preview that. And there you have it, one fairly convincing wood grain and woodcut logo reveal effect. As always, the project file for this is on my website at shortformvideo.com, complete with the PSD file I've used for the texture in the background. So if you want to go there and register, grab the project file and use it. But be nice and do give me a credit if you use it in your own work. That's it for now. Hope you found it useful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.